Hello to everyone watching on our live stream and our audience here today, and welcome to our forum to discuss the upcoming referendum for the choice, or the voice I should say, to Parliament. But before we get underway, I'd like to welcome traditional owner Lewis Burns for a welcome to country on the country in which we're on today.
Thanks, Nick. For those that don't know, my name's Lewis Burns, and I've been given the honour to welcome everyone onto country today. So without further ado, through the mother, Makatan Najang, Maranyanyani Naramang, Tabagawarari, Wilawarari, Mangawarari. Thank you very much. I'd like to take a minute to, if you can stand, and we'll do a minute's silence in recognition of our elders past, present and emerging. Thank you. It'll only be a moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lewis.
You're welcome.
Well, welcome along to Dubbo Regional Council's forum to talk about the upcoming referendum, the vote this Saturday to decide on a change to the Constitution for an Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander voice to Parliament. So far, the pre-poll for Dubbo is a bit lower than we've had for most federal and state elections, which at this stage would suggest that a number of people are still waiting to cast their vote or possibly undecided. So it's an opportunity to begin to talk about what this issue is and our panel today and how they've become to form their opinion and perspectives that they've picked up along the way. We do have some community submitted questions to run through and some general questions too. But to meet our panel today, let's run through that as well. First of all, local lawyer, Jara Marascario. Now, I had a shot at Jara Marascio. It's okay. It will settle eventually. So Jara, tell us a bit about your involvement, how this life has brought you to Dubbo.
So I grew up in Sydney and have moved to Dubbo earlier this year after spending a bit of time in the Northern Territory. Was living in remote communities out there looking after a courthouse, keeping me nice and busy, unfortunately. And ultimately got to see Indigenous disadvantage with my neighbours, my friends, and with people that I was working with through that process. And now I'm settled in Dubbo and pretty happy to be here.
To have you there. The member for Parks is Mark Colton. Mark, how long have you been member for Parks now?
In 6 weeks, it'll be 16 years.
16 years.
So Parks has changed a bit since I first got elected. It's now pretty well half of New South Wales, or 49% of New South Wales. And after the seat of Lingiari in the Northern Territory, the Parks has the second highest percentage of Indigenous residents, 16.5%, which would probably equate to about 20,000 people.
And before life in national politics for you, it was a life in local government?
No, it was only 3 or 4 years in local government. It was actually a life in agriculture. Yeah.
Okay. So being around the land as well. Thank you for joining us today. Jen Cowley, author and journalist. Tell us a bit about what shaped you to be on our panel today.
I have been fortunate enough through the course of my adult life to have been a storyteller and to have been in a position to tell stories for other people. And I have worked extensively with communities around the Western region, I was born and raised on these beautiful Kamilaroi and Wiradjuri Western Plains. But I've also worked extensively, like Jara, in the Northern Territory, particularly with the Uluru family and in some of the remote communities up there. So I come to tonight with an uncharacteristically foot in both camps.
Pam Wells, traditional owner. Tell us a bit about your life outside of, a very important role, of course, you're a traditional owner, but tell us a bit about your journey to here.
To here today. So for me, my journey as an Aboriginal person or First Nations person, however you like to frame it, to come to today, it was important for me in my life lessons and in the, I suppose, I won't say my age, but my life lessons of everything that we've been exposed to as First Nations people, but also in my work life, hearing the announcement way back in 2022 around, if not now when, and getting on with understanding a little bit more information about the purpose then assisted me to become, closely aligned with being able to storytell as well, the need to share with people the rationale and the clarity around what the referendum means for Australia as a nation and for Aboriginal people as a nation.
And Lewis Burns, traditional owner, thank you for your welcome to country as well. But tell us a bit about yourself and what's brought you to this stage today.
Well, the reason I'm here is because I'm filling in for someone that couldn't make it. And I didn't want to see the place have an empty seat, so happy to sit in the seat and talk about why I've decided on what I've decided on. So that's the reason I'm here, and I don't know what the questions are going to be.
No, it's completely okay. It's more a chance to look at people who are everyday Australians who come to our panel today from different walks of life, and an opportunity for them to talk a bit about how they've formed their opinions. Now, letting you know, we have 2 yes people, 2 no people on our panel today, and 1 undecided. And you might have possibly picked up on a little bit of that, but I will go through, first of all, each of our panellists and their formed opinion, or possibly unformed as well. So, Jarrah, first of all to you, your formed opinion on the constitutional change and how you got there.
So my opinion is a pretty clear and unequivocal yes. I, among other things, have had the privilege of being taught through my studies by Professor Megan Davies, who was the lovely Indigenous leader that announced the Uluru Statement from the Heart, through meeting with a collection of people, including some local Dubbo elders that were involved in the Uluru Statement, and seeing the pretty clear call from that as a call that I, as an Australian and someone that gets to vote in a referendum, is something that I'm going to proudly vote yes for.
Mark Holt, Member for Parks, so your position on the referendum is public for most people, and that is no, but tell us how you arrived at no.
I had to come to a position early on because there's been 2 lots of legislation go through Parliament to get to this point. The second one, the machinery of the bill for the machinery to have the referendum, I supported. Once the legislation was proposed, there was a standing committee set up, a bipartisan standing committee, but clearly the numbers were in the favour of the government, and they had a very brief consultation hearing process, and there was some suggestions put through in that from some of the coalition members about the recommendations, following on from advice that had come from legal people to that committee, and the government chose not to follow that recommendation and went with their original question. And so, as a member of the National Party, I chaired a very small subcommittee to go through the issues around the legislation and then made a recommendation to my party room about the position that I now hold. I might just say,
of course.
I might say I'm on the record of saying that I am disappointed in the process. I've been strongly supportive of recognition for the entire time I've been in Parliament, and I've spoken about that. And so having not to support something that I think is divisive is a problem to me, but I am tasked with the job of what I think is doing something that is legally correct.
We'll come to some more of those questions along our forum as well, and there are some questions from the community on that. Jen Cowley, at the moment you spoke about a foot into Cairns. Tell us about each foot.
For those who do know me, you'll understand that for me to be on the fence or undecided is quite an unfamiliar position for me. I usually have fairly strong opinions, but I think I share that equivocation with a lot of Australians, and that's perhaps one of the reasons that so many people haven't yet voted. I think we're still learning all the way. I come at this, as I said, and Pam identified the importance of storytelling, and I've learned through my career the importance of giving voice to people who don't have it. And I have the privilege of being able to do that. So I've also worked, as I said, very, very closely with Aboriginal people as friends, as colleagues, as subjects for some of my stories. My brain works in unusual ways. I've been yes, I've been no, I've been yes, I've been no. My heart says yes, then my head says no, and then they switch positions. And I think that is reflected in a great many of the Australian people, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal. And I think it's been very disappointing to me that both sides of the equation have been hijacked by very loud voices and by voices who are not necessarily representative of the great mass of people behind each of those equations. But I fear that the people whose voices do need to be heard are going to be lost because those at the upper echelons and those very loud voices are very loud and will drown out those who deserve this voice. So as I walk into the polling booth on Saturday, I will still be learning. And one of the things that I've learned is that you're never too old to learn. I remember sitting in the red dust at the foot of Uluru with the Uluru family in my mid-50s, which is not that long ago, and realising that there was a lot that I didn't know about my own nation. So I think this is a really important thing for us all, and come Sunday morning we're going to have a lot of work to do no matter what.
Yeah.
Pam Wells, you've made it easy for me to understand your position.
Thought it was the best
Tell
thing
us,
to do. Yep.
tell us how you came to your decision, and I probably think a little bit more time to tell us a bit more about how you came to your position and how you've spoken to others about that position, maybe as well.
Sure. Look, coming to this decision wasn't difficult at all. Similar to Jarrah, it's unequivocally a yes voter, and the reason I say that is because Aboriginal people, First Nations people we're still highly overrepresented in so many statistics like suicide or incarceration or the number of children being removed from from home to be placed in foster care is greater than any other statistic. It's not okay for these statistics to keep increasing, and we know that the Closing the Gap statistics are actually widening in some places rather than closing, and this has been a conversation for quite a long time. So for me it's about having that opportunity to be in the space and have the storytelling and the conversation around what can we do as people of this nation to change things and make things better for our nation. And for me, absolutely, it's a voice to Parliament. And I think this is an opportunity for us to have a respectful conversation to share and give clarity to the real reasons why it's important to, in my view, to vote yes on Saturday or before then if you've done pre-polling, why it's important to do that. And it's not going to, I mean, we've got more questions, but I certainly agree with Jen around the loud voices at the moment are quite harmful, and we need them to be respectful, passionate conversations so that people can sit together around a table and agree to disagree if that's the case. And so that's my reason for wanting to have this voice and the constant voices we've had since the announcement of the date. We've had long conversations before that, and my organisation that I work for backs the Yes campaign very strongly, and our advocacy team work really strongly on sharing the right information and giving people clarity on factual information. So it's really important to me for the reasons why is around closing the gap and giving, particularly in our remote communities, those Aboriginal people that don't get the voice now, it's really important that they get an opportunity to have a say in matters that affect them. And the way that we can do this better, we've tried for many, many years, is through a voice to Parliament, in my view.
Pam. Lewis, your view?
Well, when I first heard about the voice, I was leaning towards the yes. But then as I learned a little bit more about it, I came to the conclusion that it's going to be too divisive. And it's already shown me that, because I've got friends that are openly talking about what they want to vote, and they've got people that don't agree with them yelling them down in social media. And I don't agree with that. So that's being divisive just within Aboriginal people. And now we're going to be divisive within Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people, and then we're going to be divided amongst each other as well. So it's all about division, if you ask me, and I don't see it as a good thing. It feels as though it's been rushed through and it's a little bit messy, even though there's been a lot of time since the Uluru Statement from the Heart, but it just seems it doesn't feel right. And when something doesn't feel right and someone asks me for an answer and I haven't got all the information, then I'm automatically going to say no. But the more I read about it, I can't see how it's going to change my mind.
So Lewis, you mentioned it initially being a yes. When the question was formed, did any of you have any doubt on your current position? Once the question was formed, once the Prime Minister announced the question, aside from Lewis, did any of you have any doubt on your position? So, as is.
Absolutely not, no.
Yep.
So, prior to the announcement of the question, I was 100% in support, and post the announcement of the actual question and further detail, equally 100% in support.
Dara, yourself, at any time unwavering in your thought?
I think the question should have been asked differently. I think the question sort of combines some notions with what was ultimately convenient to get a simple yes/no answer. But I think for the benefit of a larger cohort of the community being able to effectively identify that Indigenous people have had a continuous connection to this land for thousands of years, before the white founding fathers came together and established the Australian Constitution around the turn of the century, I think that the question should have had two parts and should have identified an inclusion of Indigenous people as one part, and a question about the voice and the voice to Parliament and the government as a different part. I think ultimately two questions have been melded together in a bit of an unhappy marriage.
Anyone, Mark, anything more to add there with your view?
Look, I agree with Jarrah on that one. I was hoping for two questions, and I think it's also important to point out that the yes and the no is not generally along a traditional political divide. There's people who are very strong Labor voters who are no's, and there's coalition people who are yeses. And I spent quite a bit of time, talking to people I know around the electorate, Aboriginal people, community people, and I got a very varied opinion, yes and no. And so I would have liked to have seen the question, do you support constitutional recognition? And I'm sure that would have been successful. And then the voice, I think, probably legislated. And then after a period of time, if it was successfully working, then enshrined in the Constitution. But I think people that I speak to feel that it was too big a step to go straight to constitutionally enshrined forevermore, because then if it doesn't work, you can't remove it. But the Constitution, if it goes in, it's there for good. Yeah.
You mentioned talking about people understanding research. Where do they find this information? That's been a key part of this campaign. There has been information and sadly misinformation in a broad spectrum. Thinking that the initial nucleus of this idea comes from the Uluru Statement of the Heart, do you think, and I'll just ask the panel, Lewis first, do you think people understood enough about the Uluru Statement from the Heart and what that was as the nucleus of this question?
No,
Why is that?
I just don't think it was pushed out enough for people to understand it. I feel as though it was something that was done behind a lot of people's backs and then they were told about it afterwards. That's how I feel about it.
Pam, for the Uluru Statement of the Heart, is it something you were with from day one, that you understood, knew about from day one?
Oh, look, it wasn't 2017 when I knew about it. It was probably a year and a half later. You know, look, I hear what Lewis and other panel members are saying around that it hasn't been, I'll use Lewis's words, pushed out. I agree that there hasn't been enough education around what the Uluru Statement from the Heart was. And we know that the Uluru Statement from the Heart had hundreds of people from across the nation there signing that declaration after days and days of negotiation. And some of those people were from Dubbo. Some of those people were actually here, there signing from Dubbo. And I've proudly got the Uluru Statement from the Heart blown up in mass size on the wall at work, and you can see all of the signatures. So for me, and we've had that up for quite a few years, and so I would agree it's about conversation, and that's why I think before the date was announced, we had lots of conversations around, we should be having coffee conversations, and I think that's the thing that's missing in having really respectful conversations, and I emphasise respectful conversations around the lounge room, the coffee table, at barbecues and things like that, so that people understood what the Uluru Statement from the Heart was talking about and what it asked for, because it was what it specifically asked for, having the voice to Parliament enshrined in the Constitution. For me, I would probably respectfully disagree with Mark when you say that you think it should have been legislated first. And the reason why I say that is because, and I say that respectfully, the reason why I say that is because since 1939, I think there's been multiple things that have been put up to government on changes, on certain different things, dialogues and so on, that have all not gone anywhere, except for, you know, the 67 referendum, which was, you know, something very different. But this is our opportunity to get it into the Constitution, and no incoming, regardless of what party you are in, no government can change it. And it's not going to be detailed. It's actually just having the voice enshrined in the Constitution that ensures that Parliament and government speaks to the Aboriginal people of this country in regional areas on matters that affect them.
And you mentioned there about the representation and the legislative arms. In reality, we've really only had legislative arms for Indigenous people since 1973 in regard to Congress. Dissolved in 77, reformed, dissolved in 85, reformed, and dissolved in 2005, and various bodies since then. Jen, with the legislative arm element, that is an argument that's come forward, but there have been governments of both persuasions that have dissolved these bodies to come up with a new idea. Is that part, should that have been part of the question? Is that what you, where do you stand on that element?
I think, like most Australians, when I first heard of the idea of a voice to Parliament for Indigenous Australians and for recognition in the Constitution, it was a no-brainer yes, all the way. I think there has been a lot of concern about the processes that will follow. I think people are understandably nervous, and I know some of my Aboriginal friends and colleagues are nervous about who will represent them. And I think that comes from what we were talking about with the loud voices. The legislative side of it, I think I'm with Jara and Mark. I think it should have been a separate thing. It pains me that it's taken till 2023 to have this conversation. This is the oldest, we're talking about the oldest continuous culture on the planet, right here in our own beautiful nation. Why are we not, have we not been having these conversations until now? And I think enshrining a voice in the Constitution is great, but let's make it mean something. And I worry that people are nervous because they don't have that detail. People like clear detail. And I worry that that voice that is so well deserved will be lost for that.
I'd like to bring you to your point of view and one of our community questions into how you think your outcome, the desired outcome you want, will affect our local community. It's one of our community questions. So, and that will include undecided. But so first of all, Jarifa, yes, how will that impact our community? It's probably not going to happen from Monday, but if it's a yes, there will be a constitutional change. How will that impact our local community?
So I think the sort of outreach that the Indigenous community did using Dubbo as one of the first listening posts, because ultimately with the voice first came the listening. Dubbo was one of the 13 places that were consulted for the establishment of the sort of precursor to the Uluru Statement. And the community here is, as Mark identified in the Parks electorate, it's probably about 20,000 people that stretches all the way from Tibooburra, sort of all the way down to Dubbo, Wellington, includes communities like the Nanama village just outside of Wellington that I don't think have much of a voice. They don't have a school, their store doesn't exist anymore, they have limited road funding, and their phone reception is only at the sort of community hub, and that's about it. So I'd like to listen to those communities and listen to the needs that communities like that who have been forgotten are looking for, because I don't have all the answers, but I know that people that are living this experience do, and I want them to raise their voice and to share those experiences with the policymakers that get to dot the I's and cross the T's and hand out the checks.
Mark Colton, how will no affect our local community?
Look, I think on Sunday the 15th, regardless of the outcome, I think our community is quite bruised. I think this is, I think Jen alluded to it earlier, it's brought out some of the worst in people in both sides of the argument. But I think if it's a no, and one of my frustrations, and I've made numerous speeches in Parliament about this, is this idea that nothing has happened and we need this to start things to happen. And right across my electorate, we've got good, strong community leadership in communities, and where I see that is where you get good outcomes. And so I do think to say that nothing has happened, and there's a lot of focus on the Northern Territory, but I point out that there's 2 senators and 2 members of the House of Representatives. 4 people represent the Northern Territory. 3 of those are Indigenous women. And Marion Scrimger is the member for Lingiari, Malandiri McCarthy and Jacinta Nepajimpa Price are senators from the community, and Kerry Ann Little, who's a senator for South Australia, is from Alice Springs. And so there, and our minister, Linda Burney, who I know very well, have a great relationship with, is an Aboriginal woman at the very apex of representation. And so my belief is that we should be nurturing our communities for people to take leadership through the community and through political process as part of the process where you're actually in the room making the decisions.
So when you talk about how no will affect the local community,
I think people are going to be disappointed, clearly. Some people will be disappointed. Some people who I'm very fond of will be disappointed. And that's what I'm upset about. I've got people in this town, Aboriginal people who you would call community leaders, who have been sounding boards for me for the last 16 years, who have very different points of view. Very different points of view. So much so that you know, it's caused a rift in friendships. And so I think that's going to take a bit of getting on with, but politics does move on at a pretty rapid rate, and I hope that one way, you know, we're talking if it's a no now, I hope we will move on, and if it's a yes, I'll work within the guidelines to do the best for the people I represent.
Drawing you, to obviously your position as well and how that'll affect the local community. Jen, what do you see as the local community's impact from Sunday, Monday?
I must confess that I'm more invested in how we move forward from Sunday, because either way, things are a bit of a mess, and as Mark has identified, this has created quite uncomfortable rifts in families, in communities, in friendships. But nationally, either way, there is a lot of work to be done. If it's yes, then there's a great deal of accountability that needs to come from those who are leading that charge. If it's a no, then there's also a great deal of accountability from people who have denied this voice. I think a lot of, and Lewis and Pam may correct me or add to this, but I think a lot of pressure has been put on Aboriginal people. I know at first, when I first heard about this, as a journalist, I thought, well, we should ask Aboriginal people. But it involves us all, because we are all one nation. Well, if you'll pardon the term. And I think that's been unfair. I think there's a lot of hurt that's been caused within the First Nations communities by these divisions. Yes, I fear for Sunday, and we're going to all have to work very, very hard to get back to a point where we can continue the conversation no matter what it is. But there will be a lot of accountability, particularly if there's a yes.
Pam, yes for the local community. What will yes mean for the local community?
For me, it's the start of the next journey. So all of the things that we've been talking about and learning about, it's the opportunity to start to have those conversations with, obviously, the voice to Parliament being enshrined in the Constitution. They can get on with the task and setting up the regional groups across the nation. So for me, yes for this community. So firstly, if it was a no, I'd be deeply saddened, deeply, deeply saddened. And I agree with others that it has, the conversation has caused a divide. And I'm really sad that people can't have a respectful conversation when we're talking about this. I mean, the same time when you go to the election for any other, election through, whether it's a state, federal, local election, the outcome is the very next day or the next week, and we get on with the job. I will certainly be saddened if, unfortunately, no gets up, but as a yes person, I can see great opportunities for us to get on with the job. That what we're talking about doing is having local people with voices, and that's what, that's my understanding and the clarity that I have, that it's local people that will be elected by Aboriginal people, and there'll be plenty of governance and there'll be plenty of systems in place. I've looked through that even the last minute today. I was really pleased to read some information around systems and clarity and governance put into place so that these regional forums and voices will be there for the people.
Can I draw you a bit more on that? Because that's something which many, and we've had a couple of questions raised by the community on the election process, and Lewis, I will come to no and in your question in a moment. But can you draw upon the election process and what you know and what you'd like us to understand?
I can, as best I can. So I've only read some of the finer detail today, so forgive me if I'm
Not at all.
misquoting. So once the voice is enshrined in the local government, in the Constitution.
Constitution, not a worry.
And then they will then make a decision about forming a group, which will actually, and I'm happy to put this out through my actual council site after the session tonight. the groups will be formed by in Canberra, but they will then be, we will go into regions to form the groups, and they have to be formed by Aboriginal people who will be Aboriginal people that are on those groups. So that's not a very good articulation, is it, of how I'm trying to... Let me have a look and I'll come back to you if that's okay.
The reason I draw on that is that people have often spoken about that level of detail, but there is a lot of detail in the Constitution. It's a big document, huge document, and has had a number of changes through the years made to it, and it has provisions for a number of things we don't even have since 1901. But Lewis, talking through the impact on the local community for no, what do you think that's going to have on the local community, and particularly for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? What impact will no have for the local community, and maybe speak to that more broadly?
I don't know, you're asking me to tell the future. I can't tell the future, but I can look back on the referendums and the voting that has happened over the last 50 years, and they've all been ideas made up for the Aboriginal community by non-Aboriginal people. And when this came out, I just thought, it's another Band-Aid. That was my first thought, because, and then my usual next thought is, well, whatever they're given, let's take it. And that was why I was leaning on a yes vote. But 10 or 11 people can't make decisions for 600 tribes. And that's what's left in the country. There's 600 tribes. And you've got to think about it like a mini Europe. You've got to make the decision. How can 10 people make the decision for all those countries? This is a country, Wiradjuri country. Gamilaroi is another country, Gamilaroi country. No one here can make decisions for anyone on Gamilaroi. No one in Gamilaroi can make decisions for Wiradjuri people. So how is that going to work when 10 people are making decisions for 600 tribes that are left in Australia?
To be fair, there is no suggestion that only 10 people would be a representative sample of the voice. That suggestion doesn't exist anywhere. It's not going to be 10 people.
But in whatever elected body, is your feeling that, would there be any elected body you would see work in a voice to Parliament?
Well, it'd have to work its way up from the tribes. So the tribes would have to make the decision, give it to their leader to take it to whoever's they're going to meet with in their area. Because the other thing is that the regions and the states that are in place now cut up all of our tribal areas. So without any concern for any of the tribal areas. So really, I just see this as another Band-Aid. I don't think it's going to solve anything. I think it's going to cause more problems than it solves.
Can I make a comment on the selection? If you take Dubbo, it's Wiradjuri land, everyone knows it's Wiradjuri land, but there's a lot of people here that are Gomeroi people, Nambar people, Barkinji people. They've come here for the services, the job or whatever. So, you know, does the voice have a representative for Dubbo community as such, or is it a representative of the Wiradjuri people? And if that's the case, if you're a Gomeroi person living in Dubbo, are you excluded from the process? They're the sort of questions that have been floating around.
The same way as if you're an Australian travelling in Europe, are you excluded from being involved in the decision-making of Australia? You're not. You are still given the elected ability to, I'm sure that you've got electors in your electorate that are currently overseas. It's not that them being at different borders instantly cuts off their ability for consular assistance or their ability to be eligible for social security payments of some variety. So it's a fantasy to say that the minutiae of the detail is something that we need to sort out on this stage now, because that has been established in the Karma Langdon report that was commissioned by a Conservative federal government, was handed down to the Morrison government, was sat on, and was released this time. It was released, my apologies, around the time the Queen passed away, which was awfully convenient time to release such a thing, given that people were, in the most part, distracted by the passing of the sovereign. So it's a fallacy to say that only 10 people are going to be appointed on the voice. It's also a fallacy to say that the geographic relevance of people being forced to come to mission land And as Lewis and Pam sort of commented, I'm not sure if you heard them, Mark, but they identified that people had been pulled to this community against their will, and to say that they're going to be disenfranchised because they're in these communities is just splitting hairs.
Pam and Lewis, can I draw you on some diversity of that discussion? Can you
I
bring me...
I just did want to say something before you
Of course,
ask the
yep, of
question. That in 1975 was the Aboriginal Resettlement Program, and that's when they moved people, families, from remote areas into regional, like the remote areas were Wilkenia and Burke and Brewarren and Walgett and places like that, and families were moved from there to Dubbo and Orange and Bathurst and Wollongong and Newcastle and places like that in the Aboriginal Resettlement Program. They moved thousands and thousands of families that year, and that's when, well, if you look at it now, that's roughly 50 years ago, and these people are now growing up not knowing where they're from. That was an initiative by the government at the time as well, and now you got people growing up in the country. They don't even know they're not from there. So that was one of the. I just wanted to correct that because Mark said people came here, they were brought here.
Thank you, Lewis.
I think it's fair to say too that people did move here, probably not in the 1775, but people did move here, and people are still moving here as a choice because, you know, it's the largest, you know, city in Western New South Wales, so people move here for health, education, employment, and all those sorts of reasons anyway. So in terms of some thinking around the actual how people will get the voice, if you're talking about tribal areas or clan groups or whatever language you want to use, or the Western language around regional areas and towns. So my understanding is that the current group, and I'm just going to read from something if that's okay. So leaders including Pat Anderson and Professor Megan Davis, Professor Dr. Martin Langdon and the Honourable Ken White, they were the group that created a list of design principles which will lead to the design and function of how the voice will be established. So there are 6 design principles, and part of the design principles will mean that the voice will give independent advice to the Parliament and government. The voice will be an independent body with its own resources to research, develop and give advice to the Parliament and government on issues affecting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And the voice will be able to give advice on both its own initiatives and in response to requests from advice from Parliament and government. There's more of that design principle detail in here, but the group in Parliament will form the first piece. Then they will go to community areas, key community areas, and they may even look at those 13 communities which were initially in the dialogue piece, what they set up some time ago, or they might spread it further. Then they will have those key leaders of community. So it could be somebody sitting in this community that may not be necessarily traditionally from this community, but might be elected by this community to be one of the voices. I'm pretty sure there's not going to be one person from this community. That's my view. So the process is that they will go around communities, and the Aboriginal people in that community will then elect who has the voice for them.
Nick, may I ask a question? I can't help myself. In the interest of my own learning from all of you, one of the things that I'm hearing as a concern is that we already have a number of Aboriginal organisations and bodies that inform government. Why are those voices, where do those voices fit?
So currently there are a number of, let's talk about Dubbo. So you've got the Three Rivers Regional Assembly, which is a governance type of model. You go further west than Dubbo and you've got the Motipaki Regional Assembly. There are agencies that are contacted by government agencies to provide input. They are fed into by the Aboriginal Community Working Parties. Aboriginal Community Working Parties are made up of representatives from communities. Look, I'm going to just say it like it is. There are factions in communities across the area that we have, and it's not what we want. We want to be able to have, one voice for all of us. There are existing organisations across all of the communities that are key Aboriginal organisations that provide a voice to, barriers for Aboriginal people. There are key leaders in communities. All of these people are part of the thinking. So they've recognised that in here, that inclusive of existing bodies and existing Aboriginal organisation, existing Aboriginal community and existing leaders are going to be part of how they form these groups of voices.
So those voices will come to this voice.
Correct.
So further to that, I think that's part of, and it forms a few of community questions too, how the current system works, which you've spoken through there. And Lewis, is there anything you'd like to add to that on the current system and how it works at the moment?
I had something in my mind, but it's gone. So
That's okay.
we'll let it go.
If returns, let me know.
It'll
But
come back.
the second part is the assumption that you are all the same person. When you've just spoken there about the fact that what links us all is human behaviour and factions and disagreements, and this can happen from everything from Aboriginal culture to the construction of football leagues. Everyone has factions and arguments and disagreements. What unites you? What is actually the common purpose for all of you that is that part? Because you've mentioned there the parts that do divide, but what's that common purpose for all of you?
Oh, what unites Aboriginal people?
Yes.
The fact that we're all treated the same at first glance. And we're all treated exactly the same at the first glance. And then people will decide whether they treat us differently after they figure out what we know and what we don't know. But basically we're all treated as, I believe we're treated as second-rate citizens. And I could prove it, not even prove it, I could talk about things that have happened in Dubbo in the last 6 months that will say that we're treated that way. I have noticed, and I did make this statement in the Australia Day thing, that due to the amount of increase of dark-skinned people in Dubbo in the last 5 years, racism has dropped. Because people look at me and they don't know what I am. And I've noticed that. So when you ask what makes us all the same, well, that would be the first thing that come to mind. But if you give me a bit more time, I could come up with a book of stuff. So,
is there anything else that, say, an emotion or something that does connect? Something that you, I'll just individualise myself, that a person from European descent needs to know, because it's been an assumption on both sides to say, well, there's surveys saying 83% of Aboriginal people agree with the voice, but there is 17% that don't. You're both of differing views, but I know people are toying with that decision, but I think the key question I want to come to, maybe Pam, you can as well, is what's actually the goals at the moment, and yes or no, what's the goal from Monday?
So I want to just sort of lead on from what Lewis has said around he believes that we are second-rate citizens. I agree with him because we are treated the same, and I'm not sure whether other people in this room, and I'm sure Aboriginal people in this room, have experienced many things that we experience to this day. If you go into a supermarket or into a shop, you are served last, or you are served, or you're asked to show your handbag, and those things just don't go away. Unfortunately, that's the society we live in, and so for people like me, I try to hold my head high. If my children's bags are checked and things like that, I just say, we just need to be the better person. So I just wanted to, and I didn't mean that in a disrespectful way, I wanted to share that that's one thing that Aboriginal people face every day. The other thing that Aboriginal people have so many connections on is our connection to land, water and rivers. And some people will call us traditional owners, where I prefer to say traditional custodian, because the land owns us. We don't own the land. And that's my view. Some people have a different view, and that's okay. So I think that that's a really common theme and thread through all of the clan groups and tribes and the songlines, that we all are here for Mother Earth, because Mother Earth is, we're here for a tiny moment in time. Sorry, I did go down a rabbit hole with that. So
No, not at all. It's part of the conversations that it feels like people aren't having, and things that we need to know, because there is obviously elements where we're trying to keep, for a positive campaign in a referendum, you are trying to do that, but you are explaining, of course, that there are elements to this of how to try correct, that your view is this is to correct So talking through that experience, a voice to Parliament gets up. How do you think that the course correction can work for elements of as simply as you've spoken about there?
I don't think it's going to be quick.
No.
I think it'll be a long journey still. We've been on quite a long journey already. But I think if we're united in our approach and how the journey occurs, that people will then not feel like we're second-class citizens and not feel like that we can't walk into a shop or walk up the street without being looked at differently. That's going to take a long time. Unfortunately, it didn't take long to damage that in the early years, but it will take a long time. The journey's going to be a while for us to come together and be united on, the design principles, the voice, in terms of what do we need to talk about for our areas, what are the barriers that we're facing. It's going to be something we have to be united. And, look, Aboriginal people are only 1% of the voting population across the nation. We need to work together with our allies to make change for our nation. And I suppose what I would say is, if you think that the way Aboriginal people are treated now is okay, then maybe you should vote no. But if you want to see change in this nation for the better of our remote communities, then I would say vote yes.
Can I make a comment? Both Pam and Lewis are community leaders, well regarded, and they wouldn't have been elected to council if it was only Aboriginal people who voted for you. Clearly, the broader community values and supported you. There's 11 Indigenous members in the Australian Parliament and the Senate combined, and none of those would have been elected if it was just relying on Aboriginal people to vote for them. They are regarded. Linda Burney lives in the suburbs of Sydney, with a relatively low Indigenous population, and so I think I certainly can't comment on how you're personally treated, and that's one of the difficulties I have as a non-Aboriginal person representing Aboriginal people, is that you'll be very, very careful that you don't say you know how you feel or what you want. And over the last 16 years, I've built relationships one-on-one, and quite frankly, I wouldn't be here if Aboriginal people didn't vote for me, because they do support me. But I think that's changing. In Brewarrina, 6 of the 9 councillors and the general manager are Aboriginal people, and people like Vic Bartley have been on council at Burke for a number of times, and right across, we've had a deputy mayor, a couple of deputy mayors in Dubbo who have been Aboriginal people. So I think the broader community does do that, but there's no doubt there is an element of racism in this community, and sadly we've seen it in the last couple of weeks. I've seen it in the last couple of weeks. It's been really unfortunate.
We're coming up shortly to the end of our time. This is an interesting question, and only from a curious point of view, and I'm not asking you to temper the other, but for your point of view, and Jen, I might need to exclude you on this one, can you understand the other view and the merit? So, Jarrah, for no, the merit of no.
I can understand the view. It's the status quo. I don't like the status quo.
But you, by hearing someone say...
I don't think there's any merit in the status quo. I think the status quo sees Indigenous people go to more funerals than weddings. It sees people have family members locked up at a higher rate. It sees their children and grandchildren removed more than white folk. I don't like the status quo. I don't see merit in voting no and keeping the status quo.
Mark, do you see the value in voting yes?
Yes. This has been, Australian people want to do the right thing by Aboriginal people. They do want to do the right thing. And that's why I'm upset that I've been put in this position where constitutionally I think this could have been handled so much better, and with bipartisan support we would have had a result. And so sure, I can see exactly why people want to vote yes, but I also believe that what's been proposed is not going to be the panacea that it's been portrayed. And I'm much more practical person who would work more locally, and I know a lot of people who are professional, if you like, advocates for in a whole range of things, and I feel that we would end up with another group of professional advocates, and I am concerned how that would flow through. But yes, the answer to your question is yes, I can see why people would want to vote.
Ham, the merit of no.
I understand people's concerns, and I understand that's likely because of a lack of knowing what is going to happen. I like Jarrah, I don't think there's any merit to the no in terms of what I've heard, and that may come across. Look, I'm certainly not trying to be disrespectful, but in my heart of hearts, yes is absolutely the way to go. And understanding the merit of no is really, gives me an opportunity to have a yarn with a person around, well, do you know that this is the plan and this is the option of what we can change? So hearing a no is really, for me, is an opportunity to have a conversation. Because just to sort of point out what a no vote, what the voice won't do is it won't manage money, and it won't deliver services, and it won't have a veto to Parliament or government, and it does not have any of those powers. And the power of the voice is limited to just giving non-binding advice to Parliament and to government on issues affecting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So for me, I understand that people will be worried and concerned. That should provoke a conversation to understand in more detail.
And Lewis, the merit of yes.
Yeah, I can see it because I saw it in the first instance when I first read about it. But if it's a yes vote, I'm just going to be, well, it's a yes, that's it. We suck it up and move on. And whatever we can do positively going forward, we do. I know that I'm trying to do the best I can for my tribal area, and I feel like that's my purpose, so I have to stay within my purpose while dealing with other things outside of my purpose. And this is just another thing, really. Everyone's going to wake up on Sunday, the sun will come up, and then we'll just take it from there, and whatever the vote turns out to be, we'll all go forward. Because I think that most of the country feels like that we want to go forward. But a lot of us disagree on the yes and the no, this particular vote.
Final question. What have you learned through this process? This has been nearly 25 years since Australia's had a referendum. So the last referendum we had was 99, the Republic referendum before that, 88, for a number of measures, including recognition of local government. The last successful referendum, if you were to say successful for a change, was 1977. It's been some time. On that focus, looking through everything from referendum, social media, everything, what do you think you've learned, even from tonight? I'll start with you, Jarrah. What do you think you've learned?
I've learned that it'd be great to have a Republic referendum. That's what I've learned.
Let's keep in our lane.
I've learned that the community can come together and have conversations with each other about things that they disagree with, away from the sort of nasty comment sections of the bottom of YouTube videos or Facebook posts or news articles. And I think that having conversations with people that don't have the same opinion as I have around this has been incredibly fruitful and has been an amazing example of the exercise of democracy.
Mark Colton, what have you learned?
I think the learning from this is that for referendum to be successful, you can't take shortcuts. And there's a couple of steps in this that were missed. A constitutional convention, a broader discussion, more bipartisanship in Parliament, an opportunity to get to a point where there was a broader agreement. And I think that's where this has been mishandled, right from the very top. And I think that's incredibly unfortunate.
What have you learned, Jen?
I've learned what I hoped, and perhaps I'm being a little Pollyanna, but I've learned that there is a great deal of goodwill across Australia
Sorry.
to challenge that status quo. And I agree with you, the status quo is in no way acceptable. But I have learned that there is a lot of goodwill, and ignoring the very loud voices. And it's not just from one side or the other, and it's not just from the bowels of social media either. It comes from people who should know better. I've lost my point.
Not a worry. What you've learned, though, is there anything else that just strikes you of, even from tonight, what you learned?
Again, that we can listen to different voices, and I think that thereby hangs the argument that there are different voices, and each of them is valid. I have been concerned that some of the voices that have already been informing Parliament are not listened to because perhaps they come from the wrong side of the chamber. That bothers me. But there are a lot of voices to be heard, and there's a lot of goodwill. And I think we should ignore the loud voices and get on with the goodwill. Come Sunday.
Pam and Lewis, I'm glad I've come to you last because listening, learning has been part of this, and I think whatever happens on Sunday, we are going to understand a lot more about listening and learning. But could you share your experiences of what you've learned through this process?
Sure. Firstly, I'll apologise for my alarm. That was an accident. I do
Completely
apologise.
okay.
What I've learnt is a couple of things. One, that time is important, that we use it appropriately, and we haven't allowed enough time to have good conversations around this process. I think that more investment in the conversation and the information would have been better. That said, though, we're going to the polls on Saturday, so please think about how you're going to vote. The second sad thing I've learnt is racism is still alive and thriving. Sadly, I thought we were getting better as a nation. And, you know, I don't engage in the conversations, but I have seen the commentary, and I just feel that's so sadly disappointed that people think the way they do this day and age.
Thank you. And Lewis, what have you learned?
I've learned that you can run a campaign that'll split the nation in 4 ways. So I agree with Mark, because I do feel there's steps missing in the way this was done, and that left too many question marks. So when there's too many question marks on anything, I'm going to back out of it. So I feel as though I've learned that the government can make decisions that helps the government, but it doesn't necessarily help the people they talk about.
Ladies and gentlemen, will you thank our panel for this evening? That concludes our live stream and our presentation for our forum. Thank you for joining us, and have a good night.